What Your Bank Doesn't Tell You, a podcast by UMushroom.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our podcast series, What Your Bank Doesn't Tell You. Today, we are going to have a guest. It's one of our dear colleagues. It's our Chief Operating Officer, Laura.
Thank you, Luba, for having me.
Welcome with us. And it's in midst of summer. I just returned from holidays. You can't say really it's in midst of summer given the weather outside because we're having kind of an autumn weather. But having such time of weather has advantages. So I spent 2 weeks of doing sports and thinking on what actually a habit constitutes. So doing sports is a great thing because I try to do it 3 times a day, and Laura has been listening to my achievements and complaints over the past couple of days. The beauty of having a routine is that you don't have to decide when to do it. I know I do it Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I have a structure, I have a frame, and I just run with it. And then in a certain period of time, I earn the results. So I was thinking we have habits around sports, around food. But do we have habits about investing? And here's my first question to you, Laura. Do you actually invest?
No, I don't invest, or I invest very little. So I wouldn't say it's a habit to me.
And why is that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a big burden for me, although I studied finance, and that's, I think, also the very funny part of it. So I know actually the basics, or I learned them at one point in my life. But for me, I would like to start investing with plus minus 100 Swiss francs per month. So when I looked that up, where to start investing, I didn't find the answer or the best part to invest or the best option because everything was so expensive. And then when I thought, okay, maybe I'll start nevertheless, even though it costs a little, there are so many options. So I get really decision fatigue, as we say nowadays. So I just left it out. So let's bother next month about that topic. And I always had a good excuse. Maybe I want to buy something else, so I needed that money. So I never really started. That's one thing. And the other thing, well, nowadays it's coming up more and more to myself. I really want to start investing. And also when I listen to you and Tonya also on the podcast talked with other people, always this compounding effect is coming up. And even though I can calculate it, I think it's very hard for everybody to really get that compounding effect, what it really means and why it's so important. Also, you really you should not buy your coffee, instead you invest that money a day because of the compounding effect. But for me, it's very hard to tension that compounding effect, and to capture it. And I really, while I was preparing for this podcast, also I found a very good example on a compounding effect. So if you take this piece of paper and you would fold it 42 times, you will be by the moon.
That's amazing. It's very difficult to imagine, but it's a very good way. Yes.
Right. And this one at least I can hold in my hands. So when I fold it, it goes on and on and on. And by 42 times, it would be by the moon. And this example really showed me how important actually it is to start right away with investing. So I would really like to, start investing, but I still struggle a little bit how to do that. And for me, it's so much effort to put that in there. So do you think I can start a habit around investing? And if yes, how?
It's a very good question. And you raised a lot of pain points, which every young person, but not only a young person, also people in our generation, we are used to thinking of banking when you start investing that you need certain amount of some thousands. 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. For young people, that's a lot of money. No one has it saved at the beginning of their careers. And even if you have them saved or got them from your godfather, godmother, or parents or grandparents as a present, you don't put them all in one go, right? Because you need to have an element of observation, of learning. So to your question, thanks God those things changed. And there are a lot of new players in Switzerland on the market where you can, when you have zero depot fees, where you can start with very little commissions and very little tickets. You can really start with 50 or 100 Swiss francs buying. We'll come to the instruments, but probably the best way to start with is probably buying an ETF, an exchange-traded fund. And we'll also come to that one. And building a habit, if we take the example of sports, which we all know, right? If I do sports, only 2-3 weeks in a row, I may see some results, like losing a little bit of weight, getting the muscles starting to form, but I probably won't see the results as visual as after 6 months or 1 year. Same is with investing. You need a certain period of time, and at the beginning you don't see the results. And your example with the paper is very beautiful. If you fold it 2-3 times, you can't imagine that it can go to the moon, that this distance can be filled. But 42 times, yes, then it comes to that point. So how do you build habit? The best thing to start with is get the knowledge first. In your case, you have it. You know what are the major instruments. You know about the markets. You know where to get the financial information. But for a lot of our audience out there, the younger one and the beginners, independent of age, it's very important to get the ABC of finance. And we're very happy to support you with that because we offer also education on the platform. The second thing to do is start observing the markets, because it's very much into human nature to do additional mistakes. And that's where the habit kicks in. One of the biggest mistakes which beginners do is that they start asking, what am I supposed to invest in? Is there a perfect timing? And there is no such thing as a perfect timing if you look long term. Not short term, but long term. And if you invest in something which we call good diversified instruments. So to your question, to build a habit, get the knowledge, or where you have gaps in the knowledge, start observing the markets, build first maybe a paper portfolio. And then the best thing is, as you say, with 50 francs each month, start buying an ETF or several ETFs. And do that every month. Like that, you don't have the evergreen question, what's a good moment to start investing?
Okay, thank you very much. You said now all the time an ETF. Why the ETF?
ETF is the abbreviation for Exchange Traded Fund. And for those of you who are following our podcasts, we have a very in-depth session on ETFs in our podcast series number 9. Briefly here, an ETF is a collective way. It's a way of investing in multiple shares or multiple bonds or any, in short, in multiple instruments with very little money and at very attractive conditions at very little cost.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. If you want to buy, for example, the 20 largest stocks in Switzerland, and you want to buy each of them, independent of the weighting, you probably need to invest something in between 5,000 and 7,000 Swiss francs, depending where the prices are currently. But if you buy an ETF covering the 20 largest stocks, which is the SMI index, you probably need to take something along the lines of 100, 120 Swiss francs, depending on where the ETF trades currently. And you're going to buy them at much cheaper fees, at much lower fees, as opposed to directly trading them.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. So let's say I start with an ETF. You just elaborated on that one. Is it good what would you recommend to start with a Swiss one, because I maybe am a little bit biased to Switzerland, or I probably also consume the most media around Switzerland? Or would you go on a global one, like something that represents the world, or would you diverse that into different geographics? Let's put it that way.
I see you're already quite experienced, because the majority of our audience probably would not know where to start, and you're already thinking in terms of geographies, which is great. So for those of you out there who really have never traded an ETF and first get familiar in depth, and we are going to do a very detailed podcast on top how to select ETFs, and we cover that in the education as well. But long story short, you can start globally. You can pick one ETF which actually covers all markets out there. And we are speaking here about equities, right? About investing into stocks. Or for people who have preference, as you say, you may be interested into investing in our national economy because you're much more familiar by nature, by proximity with the Swiss economy, so you can pick up an ETF of SMI. You may be interested, we have also German speakers and audience, they may be comfortable to pick up an ETF which covers the DAX or an ETF which covers Europe. If you're very passionate about technology, for example, a very good proxy is to invest in the American economy and to pick up an ETF which is, for example, investing into S&P 500 or NASDAQ, basically the two large indices of the US stock market. And for those of you out there who are also following our profile page on UMushroom, we've prepared an ETF portfolio. Have a look, see how they develop. Both ways are right. If you're more comfortable with investing with the national economy where you feel familiar with, start there. If you want to go globally, you can go globally, then you profit from the global growth. If you want to profit from the largest economy of the world, i.e. the US market, that is also a way to start there. Mm-hmm. There is no right and wrong. It's up to personal preferences.
So you really got me inspired by really start somewhere. I think also starting, investing automatically leads also to read probably more about what I'm invested in. As you mentioned before, we did a ETF portfolio, so I prepared myself also a little for this podcast, and I read a lot about it. And Luba and I prepared an ETF portfolio beforehand. We will link it in the show notes also, and I will invest probably myself in those, or at least also in the paper portfolio before. And we will put every month one share of each category into it to see also after a year where we got there, and then we can maybe take it up in a year again in a podcast to see, and also maybe to get a little bit the feeling of a compounding effect over years, so that you can also follow it towards that.
Yes, that is an excellent idea, and I'm very happy you brought it up, because that would also allow to teach our audience how to follow the markets. That's part of the habit of investing. Mm-hmm. Put aside 5 to 10 minutes per day, read what's happening. At the beginning, it requires a little bit of initial effort, but by time, the more you're into the material, into the stuff, the more interesting it gets. Mm-hmm. And it's actually quite a storytelling if you look what's happening out there.
Yes.
In the markets.
Well, thank you very much for the push and the motivation to create a habit after your vacation. And I'm really looking forward to see where it gets me.
Very much looking forward to see how you're going to develop as an investor, and how all of us are going to develop as an investor. And with that, I think we're at the end of our podcast. Thank you for your attention. And we are looking forward to welcome you at the next podcast with us.
Thank you very much, Luba.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Bye-bye.
Money!
What Your Bank Doesn't Tell You, a podcast by UMushroom.